We are back, and we are joined now by Jeff Schuhrke, labor historian, assistant professor at the Harry Van Arsdale Jr. School of Labor Studies at SUNY Empire State, who wrote a piece for In These Times entitled "This Fight is Global. Workers around the world are standing with striking U.S. auto workers." Jeff, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Great to be here.
So what's it like to be a labor historian in these times? I mean, actually, in these times, I did not mean to do that, but it worked well. Like, it's got to be one of the most exciting moments in history, or to live through, I would say, in terms of just the hot labor summer into the cool labor fall or whatever, but I guess still hot. That didn't work very well, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, we're sort of in another Striketober, I guess. We've had Striketober before, but I guess we're back there again. Yeah, it's a really exciting moment for everyone in the labor movement, everyone adjacent to the labor movement in the United States. It's been, the labor movement's been, I don't want to say dormant, but it's been kind of in decline over the last 40 years or so. And, I don't want to overdo it and say like this is a complete turnaround, and, but it has a lot of potential. This moment, the last few years, more and more workers out on strike. When last week, the 75,000 Kaiser healthcare workers were on strike, combined with the auto workers and actors and various others, there was something like over 250,000 workers in the U.S. on strike at the same time, which hasn't happened since, I think, 1983. So it's definitely a really exciting, busy moment. Lots of new developments every day, every week. So.
Yeah, and I mean, what we're on day 27 or 28, I believe, of the UAW strike, somewhere around that. I guess the rolling strike actions that the UAW is deploying. Your piece really talks about the importance of global solidarity as here in the United States. The big three automakers are sending out little media bites to outlets like CNBC and saying, hey, we might have to send our jobs to Mexico and things like that. But what you write about here is that auto workers in Mexico, the unions down there, they're expressing solidarity and showing it in many ways. What are you seeing from Mexican auto workers on this front?
Well, this is we were just talking about what an exciting moment this is for the U.S. labor movement. It's probably even more of an exciting moment the last few years for the Mexican labor movement, because for many decades, at least since the 1940s, Mexico has not really had a free and independent kind of labor movement. The major unions there were always closely tied to the government and closely tied to the employers. And contracts were signed without the union members even knowing about it, without their consent. Usually these kind of sweetheart backroom deals that sold out the members. Members had no way to vote for who the union leaders were, etc. But in 2019, Mexico's president, AMLO, signed into law labor law reform that sort of democratized the unions in Mexico, that allows workers to be able to choose their own unions, to vote for who they want to have as their union representatives, and to be able to vote on contracts and to fight for real improvements in their wages and working conditions. And on top of that, the U.S.-Canada-Mexico agreement that was negotiated in 2019 has strong labor protection language in there that allows labor law violators in Mexico to effectively be sort of sanctioned, to have individual employers to lose their tariff privileges with the United States if they violate labor rights. So a lot of Mexican workers in the last couple of years have been taking full advantage of this, and there's sort of a renaissance in the Mexican labor movement with this new independent democratic union movement that's been really strong in the auto industry in Mexico. Last year, major GM assembly plant in Silao, Mexico, voted in one of these new independent unions, and they negotiated a double-digit wage increase. So these workers in Mexico totally understand what this struggle that the UAW is going through, what it's all about, and they see the connections there. The UAW has been sort of providing some support, moral support for this independent union movement in Mexico. So and when I also mentioned that when GM workers went on strike in the U.S. in 2019, some of these independent unions in Mexico were standing in solidarity by refusing to work overtime to kind of increase some of the pressure, the economic pain on on GM in that case. And there's been reports that some of the auto workers in Mexico are doing the same thing right now, refusing to work overtime. But more than that, they've been sending video messages of support. Shortly after the strike started, I think this was on September 19th, a group of workers from a Goodyear tire factory in Mexico who just won their own independent union. They held a demonstration outside of GM's corporate offices in Mexico City, holding up signs in Spanish and English saying, we support the UAW strike, and recorded a video message that they posted to social media. So it's been very inspiring to see.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's not just the messages of solidarity. I would imagine that bolstering these unions in the wake of this agreement in 2019 and making unions more robust in Mexico makes it more difficult for these automakers to say, well, we're going to ship our jobs over there because, hey, labor's strong over there too. So that you might not be able to exploit workers in the same way that had been enabled really in the past with a lot of the free trade deals that we saw, including NAFTA.
Yeah, and that's kind of a key argument I try to make in the piece, that international labor solidarity, whether it's Mexico or Brazil or Europe or Asia, anywhere, it's not only a boost to morale for workers to say, oh, how it's really great that workers in another country are supporting us and standing with us. I mean, that is part of it, but it's also kind of strategic. One of the core demands of the UAW in this strike is to end tiers, the separate pay scales and benefits for workers doing the same work. They want to have equal pay for equal work, equal benefits for equal work. And some of the people who I interviewed for the article were telling me that there's kind of an international tier with Mexican auto workers doing the same work with the same skill levels as workers in the US, but being paid as little as $2.50 an hour. So if those workers can have strong militant unions that push for better conditions, higher wages, then it sort of sends the message to the big three that there's nowhere they can run. They can't just run off to Mexico, or they can't run off to some other country, because if labor is strong everywhere, that's what ends finally this race to the bottom that we've been seeing for the last 40 years at least.
You also write about how unions outside of Mexico and Venezuela and Italy and other places have also shown support for the UAW strike, if you don't mind talking a bit about that.
Yeah, and I talked to the UAW's International Affairs Department, and they were saying that they're kind of surprised in a way, because while they do have relationships with union federations and unions in auto worker unions or metal worker unions in a lot of different countries, a lot of the messages of support have been kind of surprising. They just been sort of coming out of nowhere, from Malaysia, from Thailand. There was a great message from French trade unionists that was a video message that was posted on social media. But probably the strongest union in the world that has been really showing a lot of solidarity with the UAW is the Brazilian Metal Workers Union, which represents auto workers in Brazil's southeast, the Sao Paulo region. This is the union where Brazil's president, Lula, got his start. He was originally an auto worker himself and a leader of the Metal Workers Union in Brazil in the 1970s. He led a series of militant strikes demanding wage increases against the economic policies of the dictatorship in Brazil at the time. And he ended up going to prison for a few years. And, now he's the twice president of Brazil. And when the UAW strike, this current strike began that same week in New York, it was the UN General Assembly was meeting. And Lula was in town, and so was his Minister of Labor, Luiz Marino, who is also a former auto worker and member of the Metal Workers Union. And Marino, the labor minister, he met with some UAW members and leaders in New York to express Brazil's solidarity. And back in Brazil, several members, or thousands of members of the Metal Workers Union, have been holding rallies and big assemblies in solidarity with the UAW. So very strong. And again, inspiring, but also it sends the message to the auto companies that they can no longer pit workers against each other in different countries, because the working class is standing together in solidarity.
It really is awesome to see. And it's like the flip side of what we see with the anti-worker effects of certain globalization efforts, right? But this one is the globalization of solidarity through being able to see these images on social media and communicate in ways that hadn't been possible before. I mean, this morning I saw too that in Canada, the Autoworkers union there has launched a strike at several GM plants up in Canada, and they, I believe, if I remember reading this correctly, directly cite the UAW strike, or perhaps that was just the article drawing that comparison. But either way, you can see these actions as working in tandem with one another. What's your sense of how the UAW strike is inspiring other workers internationally to take similar actions and making their labor power known in different areas of the globe?
I think, first and foremost, the UAW's stand-up strike is inspiring workers in the U.S. In a really significant way, and that's what's really important here. Again, like I said, the U.S. labor movement has been sort of dormant. I hesitate to say that, but it's been in decline, and this is really inspiring a lot of union members and union leaders to make bold demands and to wage kind of aggressive but strategic types of strikes, as the UAW is doing. But internationally, I mean, Canada is a great example. That union is called Unifor, and it represents auto workers in Canada. They have also, at the same time the UAW has been in negotiations with the Big Three, Unifor has also been in its own negotiations with the Big Three. And just a couple of weeks ago, as the UAW strike already began, Unifor reached a deal with Ford, and they had a quick vote on it, and the members only narrowly vote. It was just like maybe 52% of members voted to approve it. It just barely squeaked through, because a lot of the members were saying, look at what the UAW is doing down in the US. We should be also, going on strike or fighting for more. And what's happened is GM is supposed to, theoretically follow the same pattern at Ford. So Unifor in Canada already has a deal with Ford, and GM was supposed to reach a similar kind of contract, but GM apparently is refusing to do that. And this is why Unifor members at GM, 4,300 of them, are out on strike as of this morning. And I think a lot of that was really inspired by the UAW. And in other countries, to be honest, I think the U.S. workers, including the UAW, unions in the U.S., including the UAW, could learn a thing or two from unions and labor movements in other countries, and how they often are organizing not only against really kind of exploitative employers, but also in environments where they don't really have a whole lot of labor rights. Or, in the Philippines right now, union activists are being murdered for their activism. So there's a lot of courage and bravery among unions in many other countries. And that's partly why we're seeing the solidarity. They think they're really happy to see a major industrial union in the US, sort of in the, core of global capitalism, is taking this kind of militant stance. A lot of workers around the country, around the world, are happy to see that. And that's partly why they're coming out in such strong support for the UAW strike.
Well, that's some good news, very much needed today. Good expression of the progress that hopefully we're making on this front. Jeff Schuhrke, a labor historian, assistant professor at SUNY Empire State. The piece is called "This Fight is Global. Workers Around the World Are Standing with Striking U.S. Auto Workers." Thanks so much for your time today, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.